Hello, today we're going to be talking about the features of sinusoidal functions. So what we have depicted here is a periodic function. More specifically, it's a sinusoidal function, or a function that has a sine curve. Now, we need to find three features of this sinusoidal function: the midline, the amplitude, and the period. We're going to start with the midline. Now, the midline is the line in the middle of the function, a horizontal line that equally splits both sides so that above the midline and below the midline are equal. To find the midline, you can do various things. You can easily, if it allows, you can look at the function and see where it would split the function equally, and then check to make sure that both above and below the midline are equal, and that would be your midline. Or you can add the maximum, the highest point, and the minimum, the lowest point, and then divide that by 2 to find an average of the height of the function. So we're going to be doing that. So the maximum of this function is 7, and the minimum is -1. Now we add those together and we get 6. Then divide that by 2 and we get 3, which means that our midline is y equals 1, 2, 3. So this would be our midline. Now that our midline is drawn, we can see that it equally splits the function in half horizontally, where there is 4 units above the midline and 1, 2, 3, 4 units below the midline, equal. Now we're going to find the amplitude. The amplitude is how far the midline is from the maximum or the minimum of the function. More simply, it's how far the midline is to the top and the bottom of the function. So we can find the distance from either of those two and get the same number because the midline is the middle. So from this midline, we can see that it is 1, 2, 3, 4 units to the maximum or the top, and 1, 2, 3, 4 units from the midline to the minimum, which means the amplitude of this function would equal 4, because that is the distance from the midline to the maximum, or the distance from the midline to the minimum. Now we're going to be looking and finding the period. Now the period is the length of a cycle, and that is how far the function gets before it repeats itself. Now, to find the period, you need to choose a point on the graph that runs through the function, and this would ideally be one that hits the midline and is a whole number for an ease of finding the length of the period. Now, I'm going to choose this point here. Now, we need to follow the graph until we've hit a point that is identical to the first point that we have chosen. Now, we need to make sure that the period includes the minimum and the maximum of the function. So we're going to follow this. This will be our first point, and we're going to follow the function until we hit another point. Now, you would think this is where you would stop, and this length would be your period, but it's not, because it's not identical and it doesn't include the minimum. It needs to be the same y-axis. It needs to hit the same y point and the same direction. So that means that this is not where we stop. We're going to continue until we hit this point. Now this would be where we would stop, and this length right here would be our period. Why? Because this is when it starts to repeat itself. As this point starts going up and then goes down and then back up, this will do the same thing. It will start going up, down, and then back up, which means that this is our period. This is the portion of the function that will repeat itself over and over again in the sine function. Now we need to find the length of this period. Now we see that the point from this point, which has an x of 0, to this point, which has an x sub 6, is 6, which means that our period is 6.